my advice to Orthodox churches wishing to build is to build something authentic, something with quality that's within their means, rather than worry about building something that fits a preconceived notion of what an Orthodox church ideally would be, if means were unlimited. So, and usually that comes into play with things like form and style, that every Orthodox church would like to be able to build a Byzantine cathedral, a building that's got marble columns and arches and a dome. But the fact is that kind of architecture is intrinsically expensive. It involves a great deal of vertical height. It involves a lot of structural complexity. It involves construction materials that are quite expensive nowadays. And so, unfortunately, what we often see is Orthodox churches try to figure out how to get what they want on the cheap, meaning they build something that superficially looks like a Byzantine cathedral, but it's not actually built like one. Instead it may be built out of steel framing, and the steel framing is concealed with sheetrock on the inside, and it's concealed with some kind of brick or stucco veneer on the outside. And it has some kind of a prefab aluminum dome that drops on top. And it has windows and doors that are essentially just, modern aluminum windows and doors that any modern building might have. And so we end up with all these Orthodox churches that, from a great distance away, like, when you see them a mile off, you might think, a Byzantine church. But when you get up close to them and actually interact with them, for someone who's ever actually, been to Greece or Istanbul and, actually put their hands on a real Byzantine church, it's quite obvious that these American churches don't have anything in common with a Byzantine church. They have 6-inch thick, hollow walls instead of 6-foot thick solid stone walls. And if they have arches and vaults and domes, it's just a structural conceit, because there's no masonry in there that actually requires those arches and vaults and domes to stand up. And the surface that they paint the iconography on, it's just sheetrock. It doesn't have any of that solidity and organic life to give it an intrinsic material beauty to make it worthwhile to paint icons on. But it's the problem that we can't afford to do it right, so we have to do it poorly. It's a self-imposed false problem, because you may not be able to afford to build the solid stone cathedral, but that doesn't mean you can't afford to build something beautifully and authentically. It may just mean that it has to be a simpler kind of architecture. Maybe it has to be a basilica instead of a domed cruciform church. Maybe it has to be built out of wood instead of out of masonry. Or maybe it's like so many village churches in Greece. Maybe it could have short masonry walls and then a timber roof on top of that. And as long as each element of the building is authentically made and honestly expresses its material and is done with quality, you'll still end up with a magnificently beautiful building. And it's that beauty and it's that quality is what matters. Whether it has a dome on top, that doesn't really matter. And it's not just me saying that. The canon bears it out as well, the canon of historical examples, because if you actually look at the average village church in any Old World Orthodox country, most of them are not cruciform domed churches. They didn't build miniature cathedrals in every village. The village churches are often just a very simple rectangular space with a few windows, but they're built solidly to last. They might, if they're wooden buildings, they might be built out of thick log walls. If they're masonry buildings, they might have thick brick walls. But they definitely don't have the kind of height that you might see in a a monastery Catholicon or an urban cathedral. They definitely don't have that kind of sophistication and complexity of those grand buildings. But that's okay. There's no reason that a typical American parish church needs to have that kind of grandeur. What we need to have is an organic authenticity that people can fall in love with. The biggest difficulty in building any beautiful structure nowadays is that you're working against the norms and standards of the modern design and construction industry. If a church were to simply hire a typical local architect, someone who builds ordinary commercial buildings, and hires a typical commercial contractor to build it, and simply instructs that team, build something that looks like a Byzantine church. Maybe you show them a picture of your favorite church in the old world and say, we want it to look like this. You may get a building shaped like that, a building that has arches and a dome and so forth, but it won't be well designed. Everything about it is going to be an attempt to, make a modern structure that superficially resembles something they saw in this picture, and that's not going to be good design. It's not going to be a satisfactory church. So the only way to achieve something with a real authentic beauty nowadays is to hire a real skilled designer, somebody with professional training, who specializes in doing these historic types of buildings. Now, interestingly, the sort of orthodox part of that specialization is less important than just knowing how to build a beautiful traditional building at all. So I would say if you have a choice between hiring an Orthodox architect who understands Orthodox liturgical needs, but fundamentally builds modern kinds of buildings, versus the choice of finding someone who has a track record of building really beautiful traditional structures, but may never have done an Orthodox church, go with the second person, because, figuring out how to lay out the floor plan of an Orthodox church, and knowing where the altar goes and where the iconostasis goes, that's not very hard to figure that out. Any priest can sketch out a floor plan that will work well as an Orthodox church, but actually understanding how to work in the context of the modern construction industry and yet end up with a building that has the feel and authenticity of a fine historic structure and the elegance of ornament and detail that is actually worthwhile. That's something that's a very rare skill nowadays, and you need to find somebody who has actually built buildings that you can love in a in a physical sense, love the very stuff they're made of and the way they're built. So, I always encourage parishes, find a person like that. Find a person who has a real aesthetic sense and a real understanding of how to build beautifully, and let that person really drive it. Let that person be in charge of every little thing. Of course, the church has some role in dictating the program. We want it to hold 100 or 200 people. We want the choir to stand in the front or in the back. The church can dictate fundamental practical metrics like that, but beyond that, the church really needs to allow the artist designer to express that in the way that he feels is going to be the most effective and efficient way to achieve something beautiful and authentic. And it may not be the style or the construction system you had in mind, because it's a very difficult challenge to thread this needle of figuring out how to achieve the parish's practical needs, and do it beautifully and do it in the context of what's practical in modern construction and fit their budget. Making all of those things come together as a single design solution is really, really hard. And sometimes the only way to do it is to, leave out that onion dome that they desperately wanted, because it may just not fit the design that's coalescing. And that's okay, because you have to hire a designer that you can trust, and you have to express that trust by letting go of some preconceptions as to the things that you need to have in this church. And so, I always tell churches, the job of the building committee is to frame the parameters of the building project, to come up with the program document that says, the building needs to solve these practical needs, and then to find the architect and the builder to hire the team. And having done that, the building committee shouldn't really do anything else. The building committee should foster this marriage of the building program with the consultants who are going to find the solutions, and then the building committee should step back and let the professionals do their work. Really, at that point, the building committee should turn into the fundraising committee or the building project facilitation committee, provide whatever material assistance the team needs to make the project happen. But the last thing you want is design by committee. That is to say, the building committee tries to design the building or dictate to the architect how to design the building. That process is doomed to failure architecturally, and perhaps even more importantly, it's doomed to failure pastorally. It will inevitably result in parishioners fighting with each other over what they want in the church. I really wanted the onion dome. Well, I really wanted 4 bathrooms. Well, I really wanted the commercial grade kitchen. I really wanted the transparent iconostasis so I can see the altar boys. And they design by committee results in these pastoral fights where people feel like, well, she got what she wanted. Why didn't I get what I wanted? You can avoid all of this by just saying, We've chosen a professional, we've given him our building program, it's his job to figure out the solution, we will take what he gives us, and then the architect can be the bad guy. I'm very used to that. People at parishes coming up to me and saying, I said at a meeting that I wanted this and you didn't give it to me. Well, that's fine for me to be the bad guy because I'm not a member of that parish. That, what you don't want is parishioners hating each other inside the parish for thwarting them and getting them what they wanted.
Did ears burn out those words? Did a voice whisper absurd? Did your mind comprehend and ask if you'd last till the end? Traded money and lands, family dreams and plans, for a desert exile and a life of trial.